Hey there. If you've ever wondered what people actually ate back in the Wild West, those dusty saloons filled with cowboys, outlaws, sheriffs, and wanderers, you're in the right place. Today, we're going to explore some surprisingly simple, sometimes strange foods that were served in those old saloons. It might not sound exciting at first, but stick with me. This isn't the kind of history that's loud or flashy. It's slow, calm, and maybe even a little boring. Perfect if you want to relax or drift off to sleep. So, get comfortable and let's take a quiet, steady trip back to those dusty, sun-baked Wild West days. When you think of a Wild West saloon, what do you picture? Probably lots of noise, poker games, the swing of the saloon doors, rough men laughing or shouting, and maybe even a few gunfights. But what about the food? What did folks actually eat after a long day on the range, after hours of cattle driving, or after working hard on the frontier? The truth is, the food was pretty basic. The Wild West was a tough place. Fresh ingredients were hard to come by. Cooking options were limited. And yet, the saloons served enough food to keep their customers satisfied and coming back for more. It was simple, practical, and filling food that kept people going in a hard, dry, and sometimes lonely land. Saloons were more than just places to drink. They were hubs of social life for cowboys, settlers, miners, and travelers. Towns in the West were often small, isolated, and rough around the edges. Saloons were the places where people gathered not just to drink, but to eat, talk, gamble, share news, and rest. Because many of these towns were far from big cities or farms, saloons didn't usually have fancy kitchens or fresh ingredients. Instead, they offered simple, filling food that was easy to prepare and could last a long time. Think about meals that wouldn't spoil quickly in the hot, dry climate, foods that could be stored for days or weeks without going bad. Many saloons were run by one person or a small family. The saloon owner often wore many hats: bartender, cook, and cashier all in one. They needed to keep costs low and meals quick to prepare, while still offering enough to keep their customers happy. Despite their rough exteriors, saloons were lively places where locals relaxed and connected. They were a break from hard work, a place to share a meal, a drink, and a story. 2. What did they serve? We all know saloons were famous for their alcohol, whiskey in particular. It was strong, cheap, and helped people forget their worries for a while. But what about food? The meals were a bit different from what we expect today. Salted or dried meat. Beef was everywhere in the West. Cowboys drove cattle across vast open lands, and meat was a big part of their diet. But fresh meat wasn't always available in the towns or saloons, especially because there were no refrigerators. To solve this, saloons served salted or dried beef, sometimes called jerky. This meat was preserved by rubbing it with salt and drying it slowly, either in the sun or over a fire. This method kept the meat from spoiling for weeks or even months. Dried meat was tough and chewy but packed with protein. Cowboys knew how to eat it, sometimes soaking it in water to soften it, or cooking it slowly over a fire. Salted meat was also added to stews or soups, where the salt gave flavor and warmth, perfect after cold nights on the trail. Saloons served these meats sliced thin, often with hard biscuits or dipped in coffee, making simple but hearty meals. Beans were a staple food in the West. They were cheap, easy to store, and packed with nutrition. They were filling and a great source of energy, especially for those doing hard physical labor. After a long day, a hot pot of beans was comforting and easy to prepare. Beans could be cooked with salted meat or just boiled with salt and pepper if no meat was available. Cowboys carried beans on cattle drives because they were lightweight, lasted long, and could be cooked in one pot over a campfire. Some beans were spiced if possible, but often they were plain and simple, just enough to provide warmth and energy. Biscuits or hardtack. Fresh bread was a luxury in the West. Instead, most people ate hard biscuits or hardtack, a kind of dry, tough bread made with flour, water, and sometimes salt. Hardtack was baked until it was rock hard, making it last for weeks or months. This bread wasn't delicious, but it was practical. People ate hardtack by dipping it in coffee or stew to soften it. Some saloons tried baking fresh bread or biscuits when ingredients and time allowed, but often hardtack was the main option. Coffee wasn't food, but it was essential. Strong, black coffee was the drink of choice in almost every saloon and cowboy camp. Coffee helped people stay awake during long nights, cold mornings, and long rides. It was cheap and easy to make over a fire or a simple stove. Sometimes, coffee was sweetened with sugar or softened with cream if available, but often it was plain and strong. The ritual of drinking coffee brought people together, creating moments of connection in the harsh frontier. So, when possible, saloons served stew, a mix of whatever meat and vegetables were available. Beef stew with potatoes, onions, and carrots was common, cooked slowly over a fire. Stew was warm, filling, and easy to make in a simple kitchen or over an open flame. It was one of the few fresh cooked meals saloons could offer. Stews could be thick or thin, rich or simple. The slow cooking softened tough meat and brought flavors together. For cowboys and travelers, stew was comfort food, something warm and nourishing after cold, hard days. 3. Why such simple food? The Wild West was remote and unpredictable. Towns could spring up overnight near a mine or railroad and just as quickly vanish. Supply lines were unreliable. Fresh fruits and vegetables were rare and expensive. Because of these challenges, saloon owners had to keep things simple. They relied on preserved foods and local resources. If fresh food arrived, it was a rare treat. Many towns had no grocery stores, or only very basic ones. Most food came by wagon or train from far away. Cooking equipment was limited. Saloons often cooked over open fires or simple wood or coal stoves. There were no fancy ovens or refrigeration. Meals had to be cheap, filling, and easy to prepare. The simple meals tell us a lot about the tough life in the West, where survival was more important than fine dining. For some surprising extras. Despite the simplicity, some saloons offered special treats or luxuries from time to time. Sour mash whiskey. Sour mash whiskey was a special type of whiskey made by mixing old mash with new mash, giving it a unique flavor. It was popular among saloon regulars and sometimes homemade or locally produced. Though not food, whiskey was a key part of the saloon experience, a way to warm up and forget troubles for a while. Pies and sweets. Sometimes saloons served pies. Apple pie was a favorite, often made with dried or preserved apples. These treats weren't everyday items but appeared during holidays or celebrations. Other sweets included molasses cookies or simple cakes when ingredients allowed. Sweets gave customers a taste of home and a bit of joy in hard times. Oysters. Believe it or not, oysters were sometimes served in saloons far from the sea. They were shipped in barrels packed with ice and were expensive luxuries. When available, oysters were a special treat for those who could afford them, reminding people of the wider world beyond their town. 5. The social side of saloons and food. Food in saloons was more than just fuel for the body. It was part of a social experience. People gathered to eat, drink, share stories, gamble, and enjoy music. Some saloons had piano players or singers, adding to the lively atmosphere. The smells of coffee, stew, and whiskey mixed with laughter and conversation. Saloons were places where friendships formed, deals were made, and sometimes fights broke out. Sharing a meal or a drink created bonds among people from very different walks of life. 6. How food and drink shaped Wild West life. Food and drink in saloons shaped the culture of the West. Simple meals reflected the hardships people faced and how they adapted. Sharing the same stew or beans created a sense of community. The food culture of the West is still remembered as a symbol of toughness and togetherness. 7. Who were the customers? Saloons attracted a mix of people: cowboys, miners, settlers, ranchers, travelers, and sometimes outlaws. Each group had its own habits and tastes. Cowboys wanted hearty food to keep up their energy. Miners sometimes spent gold strike money on better meals or drinks. Saloons were melting pots, where all kinds of people met and ate together. For many, a visit to the saloon was the highlight of a long, lonely day or week. 8. Food outside the saloons. Outside of saloons, food was even simpler. Cowboys on the trail ate what they could carry: dried meat, beans, coffee, and hardtack. Fresh food was a rare luxury, usually found only when towns were near. Campfires were the main kitchens on the trail. Cooking was slow and basic: boiling beans, roasting meat over flames. Compared to trail food, saloon meals were a small luxury, a chance to rest and refuel. 9. The legacy of Wild West food. Today, Wild West food might seem plain or boring. But these meals tell stories about survival, community, and adapting to harsh conditions. Modern Western culture remembers these simple foods. Some restaurants and festivals still serve Wild West-style beans, stew, and bread. These foods are more than meals. They are symbols of a tough, shared past. 10. Life around the saloons and food preparation. Saloons were more than just places to eat and drink. They were the heart of many small towns in the Wild West. Understanding what food was served also means understanding the daily life and struggles around getting that food prepared. Many saloons were located on main streets or near the railroad, places where people and goods flowed through. The saloon owners knew their customers well, and they adapted their menus to what was available and affordable. Food preparation wasn't easy. Most saloons had limited cooking tools: a few pots, pans, and sometimes a wood or coal stove. There was no electricity, no refrigeration, and often no running water. Because of this, food had to be cooked in batches and kept warm over low fires. This meant stews and beans were popular. They could simmer for hours and be ready to serve when customers arrived. Baking fresh bread or pies was a luxury that depended on having the right ingredients and time. Many saloon owners didn't have the time or resources to bake fresh daily, so hardtack or biscuits were common substitutes. 11. The role of women in Wild West kitchens. Although the Wild West is often pictured as a man's world, women played a vital role behind the scenes, especially in cooking and running saloons. Many saloons were family businesses, and women often helped with food preparation, cleaning, and serving customers. Some women owned saloons themselves, running the bar and kitchen with skill and hard work. They had to balance running a business with the challenges of life on the frontier. Women made sure there was always food on the stove, coffee ready, and plates cleaned. Their work kept the saloon running smoothly and customers satisfied. In some towns, women's cooking was famous, and people came just to eat their stews, pies, or biscuits. 12. Cultural influences on Wild West food. The Wild West was a melting pot of cultures. Settlers came from all over the world: Europe, Mexico, and Asia, bringing their own food traditions. This mix influenced what was served in saloons. For example, Mexican influences introduced chili peppers, beans, and tortillas to some areas, adding new flavors to the basic stew and meat dishes. German settlers brought sausages and beer recipes, sometimes changing the saloon atmosphere. Chinese immigrants, who worked on railroads and mines, introduced simple rice dishes and stir-fried vegetables, although these foods were less common in saloons and more often eaten in their own communities. This cultural blend slowly shaped the food of the West, adding variety to the otherwise simple frontier fare. 13. Stories from famous Wild West saloons. Some saloons became famous not just for drinks or gambling but also for their food. Let's look at a few stories from well-known places. The Long Branch Saloon, Dodge City. One of the most famous saloons of the West, the Long Branch in Dodge City, Kansas, was known for its lively atmosphere and simple food. Cowboys and gamblers came here to eat salted beef, beans, and occasionally pie. The owner made sure to keep whiskey flowing and stew hot on the stove. Despite its rough reputation, the Long Branch was a place where people found a warm meal and a brief escape from the hard life outside. The Birdcage Theater, Tombstone. In Tombstone, Arizona, the Birdcage Theater was famous for more than just entertainment. The saloon served stew, coffee, and biscuits to miners and cowboys. Stories say the food was hearty enough to keep people coming back, even after a night of cards or shows. The Birdcage was a social hub, the smell of food mixed with music and laughter, creating a unique Wild West atmosphere. 14. Food and hardship, the realities behind the meals. While saloons provided a warm meal and a place to rest, the reality was that many people often faced hunger and tough conditions. Food supplies were unpredictable. Sometimes trains were late, and fresh meat or vegetables never arrived. When supplies ran low, saloon owners had to stretch their ingredients, watering down stew, serving smaller portions, or relying on dried goods for longer. This made the simple meals even more important because they were reliable and lasted. For cowboys on the trail, the difference between a meal in a saloon and a day's ration could be huge. 15. The economy of food in the Wild West. Food and drink were also part of the local economy. Saloons depended on selling alcohol and food to make money. Prices varied depending on location and supply. In booming mining towns where money flowed freely, you might pay a little more for a hearty stew or a slice of pie. In smaller, poorer towns, saloons kept prices low to attract customers. Food had to be affordable. Many customers were working men with little money to spare. This balance between cost and quality shaped what was served: simple, cheap, but filling food. 16. Wild West food traditions that last today. Some of the foods popular in Wild West saloons have influenced modern American food culture. Beans and stew, for example, remain classic comfort foods. Cowboy beans, a dish made from beans cooked with bacon or salted meat, is still popular in some parts of the country. Biscuits and gravy, although a bit more refined today, have roots in the simple biscuits eaten in those early saloons. Coffee culture in the West has a long history too: strong, black coffee that helped people face the day. These food traditions connect us to the past and remind us of the simple pleasures of hearty, honest meals. 17. Reflections on the Wild West food experience. Thinking about food in the Wild West gives us a window into daily life during a challenging time. It shows us how people adapted, made do, and found comfort in simple things. Even when times were tough, sharing a meal in a saloon offered warmth, companionship, and a brief break from hardship. The food might not have been fancy, but it was real and meaningful. It tells a story of survival, community, and the human need to come together, even in the roughest places. So, after all this, what can we really take away from the food served in Wild West saloons? At first glance, it might seem plain, simple, even a little boring. But if we look a little closer, there's something quietly powerful about these meals. They tell the story of a time and place where life was tough, resources were scarce, and people had to rely on whatever was available to keep going. The salted meats, dried beans, hardtack, strong coffee, and slow-cooked stews weren't just meals. They were lifelines. They were food that fueled long days under a blazing sun or cold nights on the trail. They were practical, yes, but they were also comforting. Sitting down with a hot bowl of stew or a fresh cup of coffee in a noisy saloon was a small moment of peace and connection in a world that was often harsh and uncertain. These foods remind us that survival in the Wild West wasn't about luxury or fancy cooking. It was about simplicity and endurance. The people who ate these meals had stories of hard work, hope, dreams, and sometimes heartbreak. Their food was shaped by the land, the weather, and the realities of frontier life. But beyond just survival, food in those saloons brought people together. Cowboys, miners, settlers, and outlaws, all kinds of people crowded into these rough wooden buildings to eat, drink, and share their stories. The meals might have been simple, but the social bonds formed over those tables were anything but. A shared stew or coffee could spark friendships, ease loneliness, or even settle disputes. Food was the thread that tied communities together in a time when people needed each other most. The Wild West food was shaped by a mix of cultures. Mexican, German, Chinese, and Native American traditions all added flavor and variety. This blend shows how even remote places were connected in surprising ways. These simple foods tell a story of resilience, adaptation, and community. Today, dishes like cowboy beans, hearty stews, biscuits, and strong coffee live on as part of that legacy. They remind us that meals were more than just nourishment. They symbolized grit and making the best of what was available. So next time you think of the Wild West, imagine sitting in an old saloon, smelling the coffee, hearing the piano, and tasting a simple, hearty meal. Thanks for joining me on this quiet journey. Please subscribe for more gentle history stories.